Today is Friday, July 10th, 2020. My name is Sophia Nelson. I am in Atlanta, Georgia, and I have on the line, please introduce yourself.
Hi, this is Dr. Redell Hearn, and I am in New Orleans, Louisiana.
Thank you, Dr. Redell. Okay, so we'll just get started with the first question. How do you define self-care?
I define self-care as caring for the complete self, mind, body, and soul. And that really, as the core, allows me to be able to take care of anything else I need to take care of.
Okay. Prior to the shelter in place restrictions that took place throughout the spring, how do you think you were engaging with self-care? Were you fully engaged? And if so, what ways were you doing it prior to the shelter in place?
Well, I've actually been involved in self-care for as long as I can remember. And so I've been very active throughout my life. And prior to COVID-19, to having to quarantine and be at home, some of the things that I do on a regular basis are meditation. I also like to walk in nature. I live close to a park. I walk on the bayou. I live near a bayou. So my surrounding is very intentional because that supports a lifestyle of self-care and health-focused living. And so that's something that's very important to me. But in addition to my core neighborhood or my home in New Orleans, I work in Jackson, Mississippi. And so I'm able to take those same types of things with me in terms of the focus on being able to carve out my time for meditation, because that's a regular practice. Walking outside as much as I can. I work in a museum. There's a garden there, and it's a lot of open space around the facility. So I, go outside and walk around when I'm there. And also just be mindful of the spaces that I have myself in. So, like I said, it's part of my lifestyle, and it's been that way for as long as I can remember.
Awesome. Have you adopted any new self-care practices since the shelter in place?
It's interesting for me. I'm usually, I like to self-isolate for those things. And I've had a lot of family, but I have family with me during the quarantine. And so the difference for me was being able to try to find the spaces to balance time spent with family and then also my individual time. When I'm by myself, it's not, it's a no-brainer. But being fortunate enough to have this experience with some of my family members, I don't want to take that away as well. So the adjustment has been, me having to find the time to do those things that just come so naturally. But I've done, there's 21-day meditations that Deepak Chopra does. Usually he's in partnership with Oprah Winfrey for those. And I've done a few of the 21 days. As a matter of fact, I'm in one right now, a couple days in. And so I like that structured of, having something to look forward to that's organized in terms of that meditation beyond me creating my own things. So 21-day meditation series. And then also I have the Calm app, which I absolutely love, and I've shared that with other family members. And so everybody is, a few of us, we're using those activities that are on Calm that we can, someone can have a meditation or an experience, and it's the same one or similar to the one you're having, and we can talk about that, so that brings it to a more collective as well. So those are some of the things that I've incorporated. And then being outside, of course, and walking, being outside and in nature and outside the house as much as possible. Not in other places, but just being able to walk around the neighborhood or go to the park, things like that.
Okay. Art and, public art, public history, documentary. Have there been any works that have really, help you process some things, by encountering them, viewing them, since quarantine?
Wow, that's a good one. I think I've come more in touch with some of the pieces that I have in my house, being able to spend more time. And I really like abstract work. And so what's really been inspiring me by artwork are colors, and not focusing, not looking at things that are, I don't know, just things that are really more touching at the spiritual level. And so how those colors reflect to me, how they resonate with how I'm feeling and what I'm thinking, things like that. But I haven't really been focusing, not that I have not looked at art, but I've not focused on it in a way that I guess as intensely as I have before, because it feels more of work than just being able to engage with something that's inspiring in its own way.
Okay. What are your thoughts around COVID-19, particularly how it's affecting the African American community a bit more, and then, of course, with you living in Louisiana, there were reports that it was impacting that state a little bit more. Do you have any thoughts around those two areas as it pertains to COVID-19?
Well, there's a couple. What really struck me when the first conversation started to surface about COVID-19 having a more direct impact on African Americans than anybody else, I thought that's a dangerous theory or a dangerous idea to float, in that we're more vulnerable and susceptible to things that we're focused on in a fearful way. And so I just thought, we never get a break. That, Black people never get a break. It's always, we are always worse than fill in the blank. So anything that's happening, we're taking a bigger brunt for it. It's not, and I'm not saying that Black people are not becoming ill, that are not dying, that is not affecting our families and our communities. But what I'm saying is that putting this onus on Black people actually, one, shed light on systemic racism and how it impacts Black people, because we don't even get to have be included with everybody else, the global community, in a pandemic. We're singled out. And also, I think in the beginning that there were a lot of people that felt like, oh, well, if this is happening to Black people, that has absolutely nothing to do with me, and so I can go on with my life. And while Black people are suffering from this disease, I also feel that there's so much misinformation about what's happening that it's difficult to really get a clear picture or a clear understanding for me about what is actually happening and how this really is, what the real impact is, and what the the ongoing association of anything negative with Black people, and Black people being worse off than anybody else.
Yes, that's a unique perspective. Thank you for sharing that. And Louisiana, with COVID affecting Louisiana, do you have any specific thoughts around that?
I can speak from how the impact of being in New Orleans and the correlation in the very beginning with Carnival season, which was coming to a close. Fat Tuesday or Mardi Gras Day is the end of the Carnival season that starts 12 days after Christmas. So, we had this huge celebration going on in the city, and people were aware. There were officials in this country and city leaders and state leaders around different parts of the country that were aware that there was a virus that had potential, that could potentially damage the system that we were living in, how we were living our lives. And so the fact that information, that nobody brought that information to light, I just really was very struck by how that could happen, in this day and age, and with the, knowing the amount of people that were going to be involved in this celebration. I didn't appreciate that it was, that there was this slant that people in New Orleans were responsible for their illness because they were having these, huge parties when, people came from all over the world, or come from all over the world, to celebrate Carnival season and ultimately Mardi Gras in New Orleans. And that we were very vulnerable because there were people that knew that this was out there, this virus was alive and well, and that was coincided with the activities that were taking place during that time. What was really very disheartening for me, or probably the one of the saddest things for me, was to see the members of Zulu organization, which really Zulu is the it's the final parade, or the biggest parade on Mardi Gras Day, and that's an African American club, and they had this huge party for the world, and with weeks later, a dozen of their members were dead from the effects of COVID-19. So, it really kind of tail ends on that first question you asked about African Americans being affected and what level. And so, and definitely, like I, said before, I'm not in denial that it's not impacting, but I also think that, watching this happen, there are powers that be that are watching this happen, or watched it happen to the African American community, and just did nothing about it. I will say, though, we have the mayor of our city has done an amazing job in working to keep people safe, and working with the information and the authority that she has to make sure that she could do everything in her power to take care of the entire community, but also the African American community here. So I appreciate having that person in the position that she's in. That's made a really big difference for me.
Yes. And in your response to, COVID, I think I'm sensing that, you're talking about the psychological effects of hearing such reports that it is affecting. So, in a similar fashion, psychological effects, how have you been processing, seeing police brutality, and then some of the social justice uprisings that have taken place after that?
Well, again, I'll go back to initially what we were talking about with self-care being part of my life. Self-awareness has also been a part of my life as a Black person living in these United States of America. And so my level of consciousness in terms of lived experience, in terms of study, this is not I'm not shocked by any of it. And it doesn't really move the needle for me one way or the other for, in terms of being overly excited about what's happened, or being unmoved by what's happening. And that's not from apathy, that's just from history and behavior. And so if we are really going to see a change, seeing people come out and protest after George Floyd's murder, and the momentum that was taken on by that, I think that was a wonderful thing for people to be able to identify and connect and feel that they were part of something bigger than themselves. But I understand that movements, the visibility of the movement doesn't make the change in this country, that it's actually policy that makes a difference. And so I, inspired by the idea of people organizing to vote, talking openly about voting, encouraging and making movements in the system, making policy changes. I tell you, though, with the murder of George Floyd and for anybody else, that, I don't want to become desensitized to Black people being killed at the hands of white people or anybody else. And so I've actually not watched the video. I know what's happening. I mean, it's not that I've not seen at a distance what's there, but I've not sat and looked directly at the video and any other video. And for that reason, because I don't want to be desensitized by it. And also, this is something that I've been aware of, the behavior, the activities, the actions, the reactions for my entire adult life, and probably before that.
Yeah. Reparations and that conversation has come up. It's been a thing for quite some time, but people are starting to say reparations isn't always about the money. And I have a friend who is really a champion of like, hey, let's just make sure Black people can get access to mental health resources or other ways to help cope with the post-traumatic slave syndrome and everything that's come after the end of people being enslaved. So do you think there is a need for us to like really get to the root of our feelings as a community? And if so, like what are some methods that you think we can adopt and maybe even institute into the public school systems to start helping children process fear, trauma, and other discrepancies within their communities?
Well, starting with reparations, and for me, a majority of the conversation that I'm interested in is reparations. And the fact that it's still a floating conversation is what's the frustration with that. I mean, we're in a country that prides itself on wealth. And if we're not having a conversation and negotiating with people that only understand money and they only understand wealth, then we are devalued as a people. And so to say, oh, well, you know what, it's not the money we want. No, we want the money and everything else that goes along with it. And so if you're able to, and we have, there is a precedent for reparations in this country. White slaveholders were paid reparations for the slaves that they lost, and I'm using the language to say it this way, but the slaves that they lost after slavery ended, they were paid money because that was considered, that was a financial loss for them. So they received reparations. So to talk about it as if it's something that we don't know anything about in this country and we don't know how to do it is a fallacy. And to shame Black people into thinking that we shouldn't be asking for money, limits our ability to gain. Also, to gain something that is essential to not only our survival, but our long-term health and growth, and our ability to thrive in a country again that values money. And so when we talk about some of the things that we want to help, that second part of your question about mental health and getting to the roots of post-traumatic slave syndrome and educating and strengthening our mental healing and our awareness of how much we're suffering internally, then we have ability to, if we have the resources, we can make the decisions about those things that are going to best serve us. We have the knowledge, the skill, the know-how, the resources, having that kind of financial support to be able to bolster those things where we're not asking somebody else to provide those things for us, because then we're never going to get the best things that we can. And so when it comes to the tools, the resources for mental health, really acknowledgement, and then stability, and ongoing, incorporating that into our lifestyles, I think that is absolutely essential. This idea that we have suffered as a people the way we have and never taken a moment to even think about healing. I have a running joke that I talk about. People need they'll pull a codependent group together because, you can lose the smallest thing, and it's, we need to get together and we need to talk it out, and we need a self-care group. We were enslaved for hundreds of years and treated like animals, and we were owned. Our bodies were owned by other people. We've never had a self-healing. We're living in a country that doesn't even acknowledge that happened. We're dealing with the very people who are the descendants of human traffickers, who don't even have to acknowledge that they benefit from that. They get away with saying, well, that has nothing to do with me now. That's something that happened in the past. Well, we can't afford to say that's not impacting me emotionally, psychologically, physically now because that happened in the past, because we're still living it. And so I'm actually a practitioner myself for wellness and healing and spiritual enlightenment. And so it is key to being able to focus on some of those things that can really help strengthen us as individuals, that will then help to strengthen our families, our communities, and help us to heal as a whole, but not let go of, those other things that are important, going beyond just this idea that Black people fight the fight. It's not, we also have to have the ability to surrender and heal and love ourselves as well.
Yes. So I have to bring in this next question. I haven't asked anyone this before, but just this past weekend, across the United States, we lost probably over 6 children under the age of 13 to gun violence. Do you have any thoughts around gun violence and the state of it, today?
If you don't love yourself and value yourself, you don't love and value anything else. You can say it, but it's an ideal. It's something that's distant. And so as long as we have people in proximity that don't value their own lives, you're not going to value anybody else's life. I'm not on, I don't have a train of thought that would allow me to say we have to take back the streets and we've got, no, because again, just through talking about us always fighting the fight and not healing the wound. And there's a serious wound there when we have people that have no value for life. I also feel that the things that happen for us, everything is put up as a mirror and it's magnified when it comes to Black people. The suffering for children and anybody being killed, or somebody losing someone that they love to murder, or, a senseless act of somebody else that results in their loss. I think that is difficult enough as it is to heal or to deal with as it is, but then to be held up for it to be, this is something that Black people do, or this is this is acceptable. I think we have to go beyond whatever questions we've been asking. We need to ask some different questions. Whatever actions we've been taking, we need to take some different actions. And so that means not just coming at this the way we always have, and then saying, oh, this is tragedy, this is tragic and this is unfortunate, because I've heard it so many times. I mean, we've here in New Orleans, as long as I've been here in this city, of children being killed in crossfire, and it's, that comes on the news and it's a story, and then it goes away until there's another story, and there's a vigil and people talk about taking back the neighborhood and that kind of thing. So I guess the bottom line for me is really what I just said a little while ago was, if you keep thinking the same way, you keep taking the same approach, you keep taking the same actions, and you're going to continuously get the same results, because this is at a deeper level that has to be dealt with.
Yes, yes. So with all of these, social conditions that we've discussed, COVID, mental health, gun violence, are you in any way applying yourself to making change through your work, through your community involvement? Are you applying yourself to affecting change?
Absolutely. But let me start that. Absolutely, I am. And the way that is for me is who I be, not what I do. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of individual ownership and responsibility, I feel, when it comes to the bigger picture of anything we're dealing with in society. Because we are a civil society that's made up of individuals, that's partnerships, family, community, so it grows up from there. And so I take that individual responsibility in terms of what my thoughts are, what my actions are, how I'm living my life. And that's really, for me, that's how I make my contribution. It's more in that vein than in, going out to protest or making a post on social media or things that are visible in terms of action. I take a lot of action, but it's more energetic action, and it's more outside of the visible realm. I'll say that way. But one of those things that I've done, I mentioned earlier that I'm a practitioner, and I developed a business a few years ago that is grounded in meditation. It's called Soul Slip, but it's meditation and wine. But I've created an entire curriculum around using those two elements to create self-reflective conversations that can handle topics from any topic that there is. But it sets the tone to be able to have that kind of conversation, first with yourself and then with small groups of other people. And I've been able to, during this time in quarantine, it's really been an opportunity for me to talk the talk. Or is it talk the talk, talk the walk the talk? I keep forgetting how that goes. Mm-hmm. But, for all of these things that were very ideal for me, and I've been teaching this method for a few years now, but having to really rely on it as a source for myself and thinking about how to share that on a broader scale with people now that I'm able to communicate with people on a broader scale virtually, about how to share that experience with other people. So I'm very realistic. I'm analytical. I mean, I'm trained as a philosophical thinker, but at the same time, I understand the importance of the spiritual side of that, and you can't think your way out of everything. Sometimes you have to feel and be able to move by a sense of feeling and not with what you think you know.
Yes, yes. And there's a lot of analysts that are kind of looking at, how things will function in the future, particularly schools. Are the kids going to go back to school, 3 days per week? Will they be online? if you could prescribe, you know, a solution that would include health and wellness and, you know, digging in deep, would you be able to prescribe, you know, some solutions for a better future that we can offer to our kids at this time?
Absolutely. It starts with self. When I talk about soul sip, that is an extension of my life. I've been in the museum field for a long time, for 25 years, I think it is now. And something that's, the anchor for museums are mission statements. And I started writing personal mission statement almost as long as I've been in the field. And it's not that I rewrite it, I revisit it on a regular basis. I revisit it on a yearly basis. And that mission statement for me, I run everything through that. And so this outgrowth of this spiritual work or energetic work that I'm doing with SoulSip is under that mission statement. And so anything that I do, this conversation, my job, if I meet somebody, well, now it's a little bit different in terms of meeting somebody out, but socializing, that sort of thing. Everything goes through my mission. And it's not, again, about what I do, but it's about who I be. And so I know, certain into a conversation or a discussion, or even if I'm reading something, if it's not aligned with what is supporting me to be a whole human in a way that I can then share that wholeness with somebody else, then that's not for me. And so it's not about, when I think about somebody coming in for a particular, I teach at the graduate level. I incorporate what I do, this philosophy, into my teaching, because that's how I engage my students. That's how I create my curriculum. And that's the information, how it's coming through me. So it's not just about saying, okay, well, we're going to you're going to integrate or introduce meditation into an elementary school curriculum, for example. And you're going to have kids doing everything that they normally do. And then you bring somebody in and they have meditation for half an hour, 3 days a week. It's about getting to the people that are actually teaching them, caring for the people who are caring for people. And so having the level of education is not about just robotic learning. I'm going to learn this and I'm going to do this and I'm going to teach this. I'm going to think about how I can be the best person that I can be to impact the life of somebody else. So it's something that I think can be done, should be done in all these different aspects of our life. People are now more open to it. I grew up in Southern California. I went to Venice High School, a mile and a half from Venice Beach. Yoga studios, meditation, chanting, chakras, all of these things that are now conversation, vegetarian lifestyles. That's part of my childhood and knowing about these things. And so knowing about them at a time when people were not really interested, or that was fringe, or, people didn't want to be bothered. Now people are actually seeking it. And so I think first and foremost, that's important, that people are open to receiving and acting in a different way than they have before. I also think it's important that you get to the people that are making the difference and having them have some we've got to have some personal and individual reflection and accountability in this country to do anything. We have tried the mass method before. We've been living under the mass method, and that's not working. And I will say too, this country is an ideal. We operate as if everything has been written in stone and we need to go back to what was written in stone. Nothing's ever been written in stone. This country's an ideal. And so we can put things that seem idealistic are up for conversation. How do you incorporate meditation into elementary curriculum? You incorporate meditation into elementary school curriculum. How do you incorporate it into a workplace environment? You incorporate it into a workplace environment. There are things that absolutely should be done. I hope that I'm a part of some of those things that are happening, or being, the ability to be able to bring some of those to the table. One of the things that the intention with the group that we gather with on the porch, for example, is to be able to have an alternative environment to these different places that tell us what we're supposed to be doing, and start thinking about what's the best thing for the individual, which is going to, at some point, impact the collective.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you, thank you. We're closing very soon. I want to ask, you mentioned technology, and how you engage is, different today, probably with different software like Zoom, Skype, Facebook Live, stuff like that. So yeah, can you tell me how your relationship with digital technology is today versus how it was maybe prior to this change?
Well, prior to the change, it felt like I had two different lives. I've been teaching in a graduate program for museum studies for about 11 years now. Prior to that, I created a graduate program completely online. 17 years ago, I think, something like that. So I've always been, for a large part of my career, I've been using platforms to communicate and to teach museum studies online. But there was always that, but I'm actually currently, working in a museum. And so it felt like they were two different things. I had my work in the museum where I was physically there, and then I would have my teaching time online. And they were separate, and I liked them both for different reasons. So being online is completely comfortable for me because I'm used to that, and I comfortable with the tools and the resources and the platforms. The difference has been bringing that on-ground life online. And it seems like they've converged, whereas I could, turn the computer off and be, physically engaged, or vice versa. Now we've been, with the museum, we've gone online, and the majority of the work for me in the position that I'm in with academic affairs is just been engaging with my colleagues, and also starting to engage with some of the universities in the area. So the learning curve for everybody that I'm dealing with in that world is very different from the one where I've been teaching online. We've been, for the most part, business as usual in terms of operations, and how we communicate and how we do our work there. So I know it's kind of a overlap of things, but if it's not clear, you can ask me a better way to clarify it. But it just, everything now is in this place that used to be that I really comfortably functioned in, and was, at a whole different place in how I moved around and communicated. So, and the big part for the museum is trying to, is engaging an audience virtually in a space that people are so used to being in physically. And that's, a big challenge there. But I'm sure as people become more comfortable with engaging online, which it seems that they are, and we probably have already peaked even in this short amount of time, that we're starting to find what's going to be the comfort level, or what's going to be the base level for how we communicate online going forward.
Okay. And how are you staying involved with those decision making, or, incorporating your ideas, your vision?
The biggest part for me is, and I'll speak specifically to what I'm doing at the Mississippi Museum of Art. Is just in January 2020, I started developing a Department of Academic Affairs, and the ideal was that we would bring students from 4 local colleges and universities into the museum for practical experience. At the same time, they would be studying with me. I created curriculum for them to be able to have museum theory in a place where they were actually having museum practice. So that was the intention. And then as of March, I began to have to start to rethink what that would look like with more virtual engagement. And as I mentioned, I was comfortable with that because I've been teaching online for almost 20 years. But that practical part about being in the museum and how to have that be a virtual experience. And so that's really what I'm thinking about now, how to make that happen, how to have that experience be as informative as possible during this period of time where we're separated from the museum. I mean, I trust that there's going to be some point where we'll go back to that ideal. But in the meantime, I think it's important to find ways to make that experience as meaningful and as engaged as possible. And so what that will look like is, how the different departments in the museum are able to create projects and activities that engage those students that will come in for internships in the museum. But I also have 2 post-bac fellows that were hired at the beginning of the year that are actually part of the staff, and they're working and doing that same hybrid of working on assignments and then also studying online with online curriculum with me. So we're figuring it out. The other big part of my work right now is what's happening with colleges and universities and their decisions to be able to come back and engage their students in the fall. And, as you know from what's happening in news reports, and from conversations I'm having with academics, there's still so many unknowns because this, like everything else, is it's a political tennis ball that's being batted back and forth to the benefit of not the ball, but the people that are doing the batting. Mm. So we really will see. I haven't said I don't know as much in my life as I have in the past few months. I mean, I've never have said it that much, but that's really so much of the bottom line for a lot of things right now. It's just not knowing.
Absolutely. Well, my second to last question is, who is Dr. Redell Hearn?
Woo! Well, there's 2 people in there. Let's see, who is Dr. Redell? Dr. Redell Hearn is a museologist with over 25 years experience in the museum field on a variety of levels, from working in museums to teaching about museums inside this country, all over this country, as well as abroad. That's Dr. Redell Hearn, the thinker. Redell Hearn, the spiritual practitioner, is the creator of Soul Sip, which is a class that blends the sacred and social elements of guided meditation and wine appreciation with a focus to help relax the mind, elevate the senses, and savor the moment. And that's really a metaphor for how Redell lives her life.
Awesome. And in conclusion, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you want to make sure we have recorded at this time?
Yeah, I'd like to say in reference to what's happening in what's happening now, we only ever have the moment that we're in. I have my brother Dwayne says, each precious moment is what we have in this life. And so with all my heart, I hope that people are able to not get crushed by the wave of chaos and toxicity and venom and anger for any of the challenges that they find themselves in, and that they find some way to enjoy those precious moments in life, because this is not, air quote, unprecedented times. This is just time. Time is what it is. And so we have the choice about what we do with the time we have. And it doesn't mean that we don't push for what we want, but it's also important to embrace what we have. And so I hope that people are able to find some peace, some joy in the precious moments that they have in their lives.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Redell Hearn. This has been a true honor to record your feelings around self-care in 2020.
Well, thank you. I really am honored that you reached out and offered me this opportunity to have a conversation with you. Thank you so much.
All right. And I'll stop that right there.